We are here to demonstrate the capabilities of 5G technology. Verizon has been doing a lot of testing in the field. There are some unique capabilities that 5G brings, like really big bandwidth and very low latency. And we wanted to show what we can do with 5G in the sports world, that it's almost like real time. It's as if you're seeing with your real eyes.
It's so crazy to think that the signal is that fast, you're still able to move and interact with things around you.
It's crystal clear and there's no lagging or anything. It's like you don't even have these on.
There's a lot of things you can do with this. This is something that is definitely the future of technology.
It is just the beginning of what we can do.
Yeah. We're going to talk a little 5G. How many people have heard about 5G?
Everybody.
How many of you actually think you know what it is? Okay. We're gonna help with that, and we're gonna use sports as a interesting prompt to go and discuss the definition, the capability, and when you look at all the immersive experiences that we've talked about today, a lot of that's going to depend on what kind of infrastructure do we have to make that a reality. And so happy to have this esteemed panel, and maybe go down the line and introduce yourself and where we come from and what do you do?
Sure. My name is Rahat Ahmed. I'm the co-founder and chief of strategy at TrinityVR. We've been using virtual reality as a platform via which to train, scout, and potentially value professional athletes. Right now, we work with a few Major League Baseball teams, and we do plan on expanding into other sports in the future.
Hi, Steve Hellmuth. I'm the EVP of Media Operations and Technology at the NBA. So I oversee the networks at the NBA, kind of the ecosystem that allows all the digital to happen, as well as statistics and global media delivery.
I'm Sundeep, the director of NYU Wireless. So I know the wireless side. I don't know much about or anything about sports. I think even if I had those goggles in that last video, I would definitely not be able to shoot that shot. So hoping I'll learn a lot from all you sports fans out there.
Yeah, me too. I'll join in there. Sanyogita, Shamsunder, leading 5G ecosystems at Verizon.
My name is Peter Linder. I'm working for Ericsson, heading marketing for 5G in North America.
Need one of these. There you go. So we saw a quick video of what 5G can do today. I don't know how soon I'm going to be playing pickup basketball with those goggles on, and I don't know if that's going to improve our game at all. But if you look at some of these new experiences that we've talked about, there's some stuff that needs to happen to make that a scalable reality. And so maybe talking to you two first, what are those barriers today when you're trying to build experiences for your business, and how are you thinking about what needs to get done in the future from an infrastructure perspective?
So we actually do have, that certainly, the Verizon demonstrations you saw is certainly the future, but we actually do have an app now, an NBA AR app, that allows you to place a basketball net and hoop and rim wherever you wish, and then you take shots with your arm, right? So it takes advantage of the accelerometer in the phone. So
I can make it closer.
You can make it closer.
That's good.
So obviously, with a 5G experience, you could perhaps go all the way, right, and put a rim in your backyard, right, and be shooting hoops to a virtual hoop, and be getting accurate feedback on whether you're making it or not, right? So that's really the step. That's a good example of a step that from 4G to 5G that we could possibly take to provide that completely immersive experience.
We got a couple new customers.
Yeah.
I think for us, it's easy when we work with a professional team because they've got a budget. They can spend thousands and thousands of dollars on hardware, but we want to scale that down all the way down to the average consumer to help them learn to get better at sports and potentially get scouted by pro teams or colleges. They can't have $5,000 of hardware, $2,000 of hardware. So getting GPU rendering, for example, to be done on the cloud and then distributed through 5G would probably be the most massive thing that we could do, because then kids can have fairly lightweight headsets in VR or AR, and then we can process tons of data and do real-time, very immersive kind of experiences. And I don't know how far we are from that, but that's kind of our dream, and we'd love to get to that.
Yeah, so I would say 5G is very important for VR, right? Because having participated greatly in the experiments with 3D in 2007, 2008, when there was a 3D outbreak, right? The issue really is one of when you focus on somebody, right, you defocus the rest of the world, right? Only one person at a time or one object at a time is in 3D, right? So the issue now with VR acceleration is that what we need to do is we need to have tracking, right, on your eyes so the system knows what you're looking at, and then you need to be able to bring that into sharp focus, right? So that's the kind of where 3D, where VR falls apart, you know, over LTE, where 5G offers an answer. I mean, I think that it will provide an acceleration point for VR.
So there's a couple demands here, one on how quickly and how fast can you react and change the experience based off of what the user is doing in real time.
Yep.
And then your point is we've got use cases and experiences that are built today that are unable to scale because it's limited by hardware costs, localization, and, you know, and professional league star budgets.
Yeah.
Cool. So it seems like there's some opportunity there, and we all think 5G can solve it, but some of the questions become, what is 5G? And so ironically, we've got the experiences that need to get built, and then we've got the technology chops on the other end that's going to talk about what it is. So maybe we can go down the line here and maybe talk about some of the different components of 5G and how and why we should think about it differently than 4G in that type of context.
Yeah. So 4G was primarily a connectivity play, right? So we had one thing, speed, bandwidth, and that's what we played with. 5G, if you start looking at it, is actually a platform that allows you to do a lot more than just connectivity. You can think about it as a computing platform with connectivity. Things like GPUs and high capacity CPUs, high performance CPUs, you don't have to be carrying them with you in a phone or a headset, right? You don't want to, you can't, and imagine taking that power and unleashing it on a system and a network that as if you have it on you, right? So it's actually sitting in the cloud, but it's behaving as if it's with you. And that's because of the low latency that the network provides, that it's almost real time. So you can unload the processing to the network, and things like very low cost and lightweight headsets start becoming a reality. Today, the reason why those headsets, VR headsets, are so huge is because they have a lot of processing in them, right? And they need to be tethered. You need to be tied to a laptop for good experience. Of course, there's others that are wireless enabled, but then the experience is not the same as on one of those tethered and big headsets. So take those, make them smaller, right? Take the wires out, and you have the experience on the go wherever you want with the scale that you can enable things like what TrinityVR is talking about, and for the consumer and in the gaming and all other industries, right? So that's what, it's a connectivity and compute platform. That's how I describe 5G. Sandeep, you want to add anything?
No, I think that was a really good summary of that. I mean, of course, it is I think the people look at it from the wireless perspective in three requirements. One is to have much higher bandwidths, and the other is to lower the latency, both of what would be needed for these kind of applications where you're offloading, plus also the other part is having a large amount of connectivity, a massive number of devices. But that being said, some of these things can be, particularly the large number of devices, can be done with just upgrades to 4G networks as we know them. But we can talk about these things.
Peter, other thoughts?
I think that what it means, what I think is different is that we're seeing a paradigm shift. Today we're typically talking about a device, and then we're talking about a network that's transporting the data quite a bit, and then we have the applications residing over here. And that was very much done for a world where we created the data or the video streams, and then it was sent down, but it was not necessarily in real time. As we introduce 5G, a couple of things change dramatically. First, the latency in the network, so what it gets from A to B, is a lot less. And then we're moving the cloud a lot closer to the users. And those two things are the enablers for actually moving a lot of the processing off the device itself. So I see it as a very large paradigm shift, and which also going to affect like business model. Today, we have for broadband, we're using a business model that we invented 20 years ago. We charge for bits and bytes in different shapes and form. And with this new platform, we also see the opportunity to come in and look at very different business models which is more tied to the experiences that are delivered.
And we talk a little bit about that shift from the cloud closer to the end device. They call it edge computing or fog computing. Maybe you can to touch a little bit more on what is the intelligent edge network and how do we think about that as it complements 5G?
Right, so today, as Peter was saying, almost all your applications are resident and interacting with the cloud, which is maybe central, maybe a few locations throughout the country. But fast forward to tomorrow, the network itself from a wireless network viewpoint is changing, right? We have a dense network with a lot of compute capabilities that are a little different than what we've had in the past. So in the past, when our partners such as Ericsson built a network, it was on a general purpose hardware, special purpose hardware that you could only run wireless applications and services on. Today, we are talking about using general purpose compute servers that typically reside in a cloud, in clouds such as Amazon or Azure or Google Cloud, similar hardware that will not only run network functions, but as well as applications, right? And because of that virtualization and the type of hardware that is being used, which is general purpose, that gives us the ability to have these compute platforms closer to the user and then allow for low latency. So most of your applications then will reside at those locations closer to you, so as to give you a better experience than what you're able to get today, perhaps. Most of the applications maybe today will be the same, but then the edge compute platforms will enable new applications, like for example in virtual reality, going back to the same example, right? You want to be able to focus the parts of the scene that the person is focusing on and defocus everything else. And if I can do that compute, that rendering in the cloud, I'll be able to shave off cost and complexity on the device itself. And that is not possible on today's networks, but those will be possible on tomorrow's networks. And then we can talk about similar examples across different verticals, not just sports, manufacturing, healthcare, and things like that, where you can have all those applications residing at the edge.
Right. I think one very important aspect tied to that, when you distribute the hardware that's sitting closer to the users, it also changes the dynamics for the software on top of it. Yep. The software in a network today is typically released twice per year. So we upgrade the network twice a year, and we decide on what is going to happen perhaps 18 to 24 months out. So the software is coming with very low cadence. When we have a general purpose platform distributed and we're starting to release the software every month, then it's way easier to tailor it to the capabilities that a unique service like the media industry for sports needs something. You don't have to wait in a 24-month queue. It can come with a lot quicker. And that is one of the innovative elements that the 5G platform is going to be fundamentally different from 4G. So where it is possible to introduce software at a fast pace.
Right. And so as we look at 5G and edge coming together, it's kind of a peanut butter and jelly making the delicious sandwich that is. Yeah. And when you go and think about what you do with that, right? So we talked about some of the technical components. The questions then become, and we talked a little bit about VR. When you think about venues and arenas, you did some work with the Warriors, I think, over time, right? Like how does the arena and the venue infrastructure change over time, and what does that mean for the fan experience?
Yeah, so we're focused on making the people that are in the venue feel as if they're as comfortable as they are at home. And the people at home, we want to make them feel like they're in the venue. Right? So we do it both ways. So there's actually a package within League Pass broadband where you can buy it without commercials. So you stay in the venue for all the breaks. You get to see the contests, the dancers, the mascots, the Kiss Me Cam. You get to see everything. And people, particularly around the world, love that, the idea that they can be in the venue. So I think, obviously, 5G solves a lot of the spotty issues related to Wi-Fi, right? So if I was building an arena today, I'd put in a 5G infrastructure with Wi-Fi points, and then ultimately you're probably going to drop the Wi-Fi points and just go 5G because it's much better at handling a crowd than Wi-Fi. But we do want our fans connected, but to tell you the truth, the most important thing is their connectivity to the outside world, right? For fans to be able to tell their friends what a great time they're having at an NBA game. Because otherwise, they engage on the screens. You know, that's the massive video screens that we put in, are very, very popular.
I've got one that big in my basement.
We do have with our new league something that we're talking to Verizon about, which is that we have 2K, right? So it's going to debut in May. There are 17 teams in 2K. The draft is at Madison Square Garden on April the 4th, right? So men and women from their basements have emerged and gotten rated. and they have been valued, and they've been placed in a draft order, and the teams are going to draft. So the issue is that an unnamed studio someplace in Brooklyn, because I haven't done the deal yet, we have to play a 17-week series, right? Because we have to fly in all the teams to play. And that is because in esports, nobody wants to be further from the server than the other guy, right? They want to make sure that everything's exactly level. So they actually want to be in the same room, the same network. But I think with 5G, there's methodology, I'm told, to clock the feeds so that we could potentially have teams, both domestically and globally, play from around the world. And it's something that's just not done in esports now. But obviously, with a 17-week series, with a 17-week season and 17 teams, we have a need.
Yeah. I do want to add on. I did not make the cut, so that was heartbreaking. I think what's interesting about that is one of the reasons people need to do it on site right now for competitive gaming in esports is because of cheating. And if you were to be able to run the PCs on the cloud and therefore control everything there, you could then actually have two people around the world playing each other without worrying about cheating. And that's actually a really interesting thing that we don't think about in esports too often. And that's exciting in itself. But I also love the idea of me being here and watching a Rockets game with my friend who's in Houston. Yes. And I love that. And I think that's an exciting prospect for all the consumers out there. Yeah. So it's not training, but I still want to do it.
If I could just interject one contrarian view of this, which is, I think that the network improving and the network edge is an extremely valuable, important component, but we have to recognize also that the device manufacturers are also working very hard to improve the capabilities on your device as well. So for example, I was in the NIPS conference just a few weeks ago when Qualcomm was demonstrating very, very powerful machine vision algorithms on a pretty low power device. So it's not 100% that I think you shouldn't come away from this talk saying that, we'll have to move everything to the cloud. There will be a venue where part of these processing, will be able to be done on the local devices. And I think it's still to be seen what that division exactly will be. I think there'll be definitely a role for these virtualized edge servers, but we're going to also see our low-cost devices getting higher power too.
I'd be really interested in seeing how artificial intelligence computing is going to evolve, because if that's going to be local-based or if that's going to be on the cloud. Because as AI gets more and more complex, you might not be able to run it on site.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah, the partition is not clear yet, and I think that's what we're doing as part of our ecosystem and innovation team, is to basically understand what makes sense, right? What is the right trade-off? What are the right trade-offs on doing something locally on the device versus the network? And the compute demands just keep going up. But going back to the venue, So I don't know if you follow the stats, but for the Super Bowl, on the networks, on the wireless networks, there was like 66 terabytes of data that was used in that 4 or 5 hour time period, and that's a lot of data, right? So obviously people are doing a lot. They're in the stadium watching the game, but they're also communicating with their friends outside of the stadium, and the demands just keep going up. So in that sense, 5G is almost a given that you will need some kind of more capacity, more higher performance in networks in the stadium. And plus, if you add the mobile edge compute platform to it, you can think about doing a lot more stuff locally at the stadium, but some of the traffic doesn't need to go out, right? You're taking the traffic all the way back to the center of the cloud and bringing it back again to the edge. So things like that are possible. So more efficient use of technology, maybe not obvious for the consumer, but it certainly helps overall. And then on the flip side, for the fan who is sitting at home and consuming a game, you guys, NBA had a VR, has a couple of different VR transmissions, right? VR video and game partnerships, right, where you can actually watch any which angle that you want. And if you saw the video before, it was just an extreme case of what we wanted to show what is possible. But imagine a time when you'll be able to watch any angle that you wish to watch sitting at home. And for that, you really need a lot more bandwidth and perhaps even lower latency for real-time engagement. So those are some 2 different ways that the venue experience might be different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no question. We're experimenting greatly with HTML overlays of live video that are synchronous, right? So obviously 5G is going to help that greatly because because the speed, right, and the low latency. So in other words, you can define on your screen the graphics that you want to see, the statistics you want to follow, if it's fantasy, or if it's gaming, or if it's navigating to another game. So in other words, we're trying to say the mobile device is your first screen and the screen from which you can accomplish everything. And it really is different in the sense that we've designed all these experiences for tablets and for PCs. And in general, people are leaning back from them. Yeah. But with our fastest growing audience, with a mobile device, your hands are right there, your fingers are right there, so it opens up a lot of opportunity. So I kind of look forward to, because I distribute video globally, that I could distribute just pictures, right? And then the user in Spain, or the user around the world could define what he wants to see in the language that they want to see the graphics in, right? So because cloud graphics, and the video would just be united in a 5G universe.
And that mobile first world needs not only to distribute the video in real time, but some of the AI work that you were talking about to complement overlays, fantasy statistics, social statistics, and feeds in real time. And that's going to take some evolution of the infrastructure, yeah? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we have no doubt that this is going to work in the sense that we experiment with this stuff all the time in social media. So anytime we post something in social media, on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, if it includes graphics, video, graphics, analytics, and a story, 2 million hits, right? If you just put up naked video, you're not going to get anywhere close to that, right? So in other words, people want this compressed, more informative, experience, So we regard our test platform in this to really be social media, and it's playing out well.
Unless your meme has a caption, it's just a picture.
Right.
Exactly. It's interesting also to see how the development is not only in the game or when the game is taking place, but before, like for the tailgating and the activities there. And I saw some stats after Super Bowl was almost as much traffic consumed at the airport the day after as was in the stadium at the game. I think the numbers were 6 terabytes at the airport and 16 at the game. So it doesn't really it doesn't stop. And it supports the discussion that was here before, that how do we engage with the fan? The fans are so passionate, so they seem to be engaged in various ways. And those kind of traffic patterns are also creating demand for actually, we need a faster network.
Yeah. How else is Ericsson thinking about the sort of before, during, and after experience from a deployment perspective? Are there interesting, to your point, you're going to the airport after, how are you thinking about elongating the experience in new ways?
So we're looking very much about what kind of network capabilities do you need in which locations. Certain locations you have pretty much all technologies. Like here in New York City, you have subway, you got train, you got taxis, you got cars, you got everything. If you go a little bit further out, it's perhaps the personal car. That's the only way of driving around. The networks work pretty much the same. So we're looking at where do we need to build coverage? Do we need it in sports stadiums? Do we need it along the commuter routes and rails that the people are coming to the stadiums with? Do we need it in suburban areas? Where does it start and where does it end? So it's a little bit about building the right type of coverage for the network, talk about wireless coverage, that is suitable for that particular area. So it's not one antenna fix it all. It's very much different type of surgical deployments.
Right. Sundeep?
Oh, I think, on that point about coverage, I think one of the things that is important to recognize about the 5G, a lot of the coming technologies can deliver very high data rates, but only in certain areas. For example, one of the technologies is to use very high bandwidth frequencies, but these have much less coverage or penetration than the existing frequencies today. And that might be an issue in the way, and they also require very higher cell densities, and therefore a lot more infrastructure in terms of fiber, and could be expensive to deploy in certain areas. As well as indoor coverage might be difficult or would require partnerships with actual public buildings. So I think one of the questions is, if we have 5G coverage, but it's not very uniform, or is not as uniform as we experience today in 4G, what value can it still bring? And I think, I don't know the answer to that, but that's one of the things that, at least for the short term when they come out, will be one of the issues.
It's not going to be a switch from 4 to 5.
Yes, absolutely.
It's going to very much be a combination of the two.
Yes.
So it's not a question of shutting down the subway and going bus instead. It's like a combo of it that's going to be the key.
Yeah.
It'll be analogous to 3G
Yes,
to
exactly.
to LTE, right?
Yeah.
It'll be analogous, right?
Yeah.
And when people are thinking about building these new experiences, right? So your example, how do you fundamentally build the application differently in this new world? Because I don't think a lot of people are thinking about, from a coding perspective, where do I put what code along that entire network to have an optimal experience for my user? And you're thinking about that already, and be interested to hear your take on that.
I think at this point, anything that you're building for a 5-year window, you have to think about the impact of the hardware. It's funny because we've come into a 3-4 year window, especially in the VR AR space, where we've gone away from netbooks to more intensive hardware, but we need to go back to having one phone and that's it. On the other side, the bandwidth situation is changing. Cloud computing is getting bigger. Artificial intelligence is becoming more important. How do you put all these together into your roadmap? Because at some point, they're all going to have an impact. Mm-hmm. And I think the value of somebody on your team who understands that has become more important than ever. And I don't know how many people like that exist, but you got to have one of those guys on your teams right now. And I like to feel like I'm pretty lucky that I have.
Hopefully we have some in the audience right now that's going to start driving all of that.
Yeah.
We have gone through the journey though a couple of times. Remember we have dial-up, and when DSL came, there was always the choice for the media. Okay, which media do you target for dial-up, where the large volumes were, and which were specialized for the DSL. And then we took that journey, and then we took the journey when we went even faster to fiber networks and so on. I think the big difference this time is that in all these previous generations, the adoption, we have built the network, and then the adoption of devices has been fairly slow, and then when the devices picks up, it makes sense to adopt the media. But now we started to see it for 4Gs, even more so for 5G. Devices are coming really quick. The adoption curves is a lot quicker, so it can pivot faster than what we've seen in the past.
Yep. And so to the point of someone's got to go and build this future, right? what to the folks in the audience are the types of things that they should be thinking about, both from a technology side, so how do you go and build that application differently and think about all those new components coming out, also from a business side, right? How might it drive new differentiated experiences and revenue? How might it save on costs in certain scenarios? What are some of the things that, Steve, when you're thinking about the next generation of applications, the team building that's going to need skills A, B, and C, and what should they be and how should people think about learning them?
So right now there's already something called remote production, right? So for instance, the entire WNBA season is produced at ESPN in Bristol. They take the camera feeds and the audio feeds back to Bristol, and they produce the game. The producer's there, the director, the EVS, the replay operators, the graphics. The announcers are still in the venue. So that model is going to be extended, and it's going to provide for what we call perhaps optimal game production. So in other words, I can not only send Tencent a feed of the production, but I can send them camera feeds so they can cut their own game, you know, in China, right? Or if there's a particular set of announcers that you want to listen to that's different than the game announcers, you can choose those. So it becomes a multicast, you know, IP network that'll allow fans and producers to define better experiences for the NBA.
Any other thoughts on skills to help get there faster? You've got a student at CUNY and Columbia and NYU right now thinking about how do they create new careers in this space. Yeah. What are you telling them to go study?
I mean, at the very least, I think it's really important to be aware of all the technologies that are coming forward, not to overvalue any of them, because you never know what's going to take priority in the short term versus the mid to long term. And being able to balance them is very important. So even if you end up being an expert in one thing, you need to know what is happening with everything else. It's just too important to ignore at this point.
If I should give a few simple numbers to reflect on a little bit. 4G, you can simplify it and said that it was about 100 megabits per second and 100 milliseconds in delay or latency in the network. 5G will be 5 gigabits per second and 5 milliseconds. Which of those two is the most important to you and your business? The shift to 5 gigabits per second or the reduction of the latency to 5 milliseconds? Because that will challenge different thinking than just saying, well, I know it's broadband, and I know what broadband is. Yeah, broadband's going to be, mobile broadband's going to be quite different in the future.
And there are applications which take advantage of both.
Exactly.
They'll need both, right? And virtual reality is one of them. And I don't know, again, when will consumers start consuming virtual reality? I know there was a dialogue earlier, is it 5 years, is it 10 years? I think it's going to be sooner than 5 years. Obviously, the enterprise is probably the first place where a lot of that work will go on, but I think consumer VR, consumer mixed reality, as long as you make it easy for the consumer to consume that, I think is what we should be looking towards.
So it's 5G is a new paradigm for us to think about latency, throughput, and bandwidth, and sports becomes one of the perennial ways for us to start exploring use cases. But folks need to think about their individual businesses, how each of these benefits impact them, and along the way, stay up on all of the things happening at the next generation of technology. Cool. Thank you very much, panel.
Thank you.